Welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast, the official podcast of Ryan Johnson Ministries. This podcast was created for the purpose of equipping others for the advancement of the kingdom of God. We hope that you enjoy this episode and encourage you to subscribe to the Blacksmith Chronicles today. For more information about Ryan Johnson Ministries, please visit www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us.
Hey guys, welcome to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. This week, I'm really excited about our guest because it's going to be a subject that people don't necessarily like to talk about, much less admit or acknowledge, but it is of great value to not only men, but women and families. This is not a male topic on this podcast. It's not a female topic. It is a global topic. It's about everybody that is listening. So without further ado, I want to invite this week's guest, Ted Shimer, to be a part of the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. Ted, thank you so much for being a part of this episode.
Hey, Ryan, it's good to be with you. I appreciate you having me on.
Well, it is my honor, and I'm looking forward to diving into this. The statistics alone are astronomical. The reality, though, is really fascinating. But before we get on the subject, let us and everyone else that may not be familiar with who you are, give us a little bit of a background of who Ted is and share whatever you want to share on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, my wife and I met at the University of Arkansas. So I didn't come from a church background, started following Christ right before college, and we both got involved with a campus ministry, really discipled through the ministry. We went on staff with the ministry, and we've been on staff with student mobilization for the last 30 years, discipling college students. And it was really kind of in that context that I really began to see the huge need for addressing this issue of pornography. As the early to mid 2000s, we just started seeing more and more student leaders being disqualified from leadership because they struggled with porn. And it wasn't just a struggle, but it was an addiction. They hated it. They wanted to quit, but they couldn't quit. And we realized as a ministry, we're either going to have to lower our standards for leadership or find real solutions to this issue. And so it was really in 2007 that as a ministry, we identified pornography as the biggest obstacle to us fulfilling our mission of building spiritual leaders for Christ. And so that was the year that we started having all of our staff men go through a pornography addiction recovery program, just so we could be better equipped at helping students find freedom in the context of discipleship. And so, man, in 2007, that was really when I started my deep dive into this topic. Which, it's interesting. We thought it was really bad then. That was also the same year the iPhone came out. So, little did we know things were about to get dramatically worse in this area. So since 2007, I've been, on the search for, solutions. I got trained as a, sex addiction professional. And then in 2015, started putting, all these principles together in a online porn addiction recovery program, and that's the Freedom Fight. It's our online program. It's free, and it's really been encouraging just to see how the Lord has used that to help a lot of people find freedom. So, I'm looking forward to having this conversation, and just recognize that a lot of people aren't willing to have this conversation because it can be a little bit awkward, a little bit, shame inducing. And yet, it's a conversation the church must be willing to have.
Absolutely. And because of the ministry, because of what you offer online, you've also recently published the Freedom Fight, the book, The New Drug and the Truth That Sets Us Free, attacking and realizing, acknowledging every aspect of this. Why did you feel it was so important to have this in a book form with everything that you've been doing?
Yeah. And really, a big part of it, Ryan, was just helping to educate the church and leaders just to recognize, because, those of us who work with college students, we're kind of at ground zero. We see these students who got addicted to porn back in 7th grade. And now they're college students. They start growing in their faith, or they come to Christ. And all of a sudden, they're sharing this secret that they've never shared before. And the fact is the church must wake up, because the depth and the breadth of pornography addiction that we see every year on the college campus is getting deeper and broader among those, the freshmen that are showing up. And so I wrote the book. The first third of the book is basically dealing with the brutal realities of porn's impact on a person's brain, on their relationships, on their spiritual life, on their marriage or future marriage, on the church. But the second 2/3 of the book are the 6 roots of a pornography addiction and the solutions that must be addressed to help somebody walk in genuine freedom. And so the book was written, both for the person who needs to be equipped to understand this issue, so we can be better equipped to help others find freedom, and for the struggler, who is personally struggling themselves.
I'm fascinated you chose that, the brutal reality. Can you articulate on that? When you say brutal reality, what does that look like?
Yeah. And I got that phrase from a book called Good to Great, where he talks about the companies that really become great, they're willing to address the brutal facts, instead of, just kind of pretending they don't exist, ignoring them, but if we're really going to have true solutions, we got to understand the brutal realities, the brutal facts. And so, because when we understand the problem, a problem half, well understood is a problem half solved. And so when a person understands the addictive nature of pornography and how it impacts the brain, man, that's a game changer in a number of areas. Just, their approach. We understand in Romans 12:2 that transformation happens by renewing the mind, that, we understand, hey, we need to build new neurological pathways, because it's not enough just to repress the porn pathway that a person's built, but they need to build new pathways. And so understanding, the brutal facts of porn's impact, I think is, crucial on the brain front. But also I would say this, that, man, because there's a lot of shame with a pornography addiction, there's shame with any addiction, but particularly for the Christian who struggles with a pornography addiction. And so we have learned to deny, minimize, and rationalize. And so part of it is helping us really come to grips with, man, the brutal facts that, hey, this is a massive problem that's impacting me more than I think. And so, man, I need to, be honest with myself about where I'm at, and, the fact that I need help. And so, yeah, it's really important to be honest with the brutal facts and, recognize them.
Is this one of those things? Because I feel like, if I talk about drug addiction or alcohol addiction, eventually it's going to be pretty noticeable rather quickly, whether or not someone is high or drunk. But when it comes to porn addiction, that is something that appears to be something that you could keep hidden for quite some time before you actually see any outward manifestations of it. Because of that, is it something that you find a difference between Christians and non-Christians when it comes to porn addiction?
Well, and it's interesting on that question, because, the Barna Group did a study, a few years back, and they showed that the monthly porn habit of the Christian was 64% of men viewed porn at least monthly, but that was only 1% better than the non-Christian men. At 65% of non-Christian men viewed porn at least monthly. And so There was literally only a 1% difference, in the monthly porn habit of the Christian versus the non-Christian, which is, crazy to think about. But I think your point is a really important one to understand, that because of the accessibility of pornography, man, the addiction, the breadth and the depth of addiction in this area, is pretty significant. Because, we've all probably heard that, man, during the lockdown, during the pandemic, addiction use went way up. But man, because pornography is, so much more accessible, it's like, if you could Google and get a line of cocaine or a 12 pack of beer, people struggle with those addictions a lot more. But man, because it's so accessible, the pornography usage has taken some massive jumps during the pandemic, and I talk about that in the book, because and most people don't realize this, that even though the addiction may have started off about sex, curiosity about pleasure, it can quickly become about how a person medicates and numbs the negative emotions in their life. And when, the addiction experts tell us that when a person starts using that dopamine high from pornography, alcohol, or drugs to medicate their negative emotion, like, loneliness or stress, for instance, then all of a sudden that stress becomes the trigger. And so next time I'm stressed at work, the brain begins to release dopamine, because the brain releases dopamine not just when we experience pleasure, but also in the anticipation of pleasure. And so when I'm stressed, then the brain will release dopamine to start the craving, because the brain goes into relief mode. Hey, I know where we can go to feel a whole lot better. And, to encourage the person to go down that porn pathway. And when a person has done that over and over, then man, that stress becomes the trigger. And so that's one of the reasons that we've seen, during the pandemic, with isolation at all-time high, boredom at all-time high, stress, man, people are coping and they're looking to addictive substances. And, there's no addictive substance more accessible than pornography.
In saying that about the way the brain, my wheels are turning right here, the way the brain functions, because where I'm located here in Eastern Tennessee, our home church also has an outreach ministry where we help recovered alcoholics and drug addicts. And I see the spiritual side and I see the natural side of things. If you've got someone that is trying to come off drugs, there's a detox process. There's the natural implication of what it does to the body. And you touch on this a little bit, but I'm really, really interested in hearing a little bit more, if you can expound on it, how this naturally affects, and is it safe to say rewires your brain?
Yes, absolutely. It definitely rewires the brain. And it is interesting because, those same detox symptoms that an alcoholic or a drug addict has, man, the porn addict can have as well, because the same dopamine high that the cocaine addict is chasing, that's the same dopamine high that the porn addict begins to chase. Mm-hmm. So I was actually talking to a man a few weeks ago, I was, helping him in this area. And he talked about the fact that, man, he was triggered, and man, he started entertaining the idea of acting out. And he said his body started shaking in anticipation. That was the dopamine releasing, increasing the craving, because it's like, hey, you've gone down this pathway so many times. And he was having the physical manifestation that we would normally only attribute to a drug addict or an alcoholic. And it's absolutely, part of, a porn addiction as well. So that's a good question.
Anytime in church world or church culture, I will say, I think the subject or the topic of pornography is mentioned, we always lean towards the men. I believe an overwhelming majority of men's ministry events, there's a high concentration on pornography. But there's a realistic side of this, that pornography is not just a male-dominated addiction, that this is also something that young women deal with. It's not an old or a young situation. It's all ages, but it's women as well. It's not just a teenage. It's male, female, across the board. What are some of the statistics concerning women?
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, to highlight that this is a woman's issue, and particularly a young woman's issue. The women who are under 30, the percentages who struggle with porn are much higher than women who are over 30.
Wow.
And we did a survey in 2019 of growing Christian college students, men and women. And so these weren't just your average college students, but these were students who said their faith in Jesus Christ was very important to them. They were involved in a campus ministry, and many of these students were in leadership. So of this group, 51% of the women said they had viewed porn in the last 12 months. So these are, future Christian leaders among women, 51% of them. Of the men, it was 89% who had viewed porn in the last 12 months. Now, the frequency tells us also something that I think is different related to the sexes, that 22% of the women viewed porn at least monthly or more, and 24% of the men were viewing porn at least daily or more. And so the frequency is different. So the women aren't as high as the men, and the women aren't using as much as the men, but it's definitely not just a man's problem. That there is so of this group, about 1 in 4 of these, growing Christian college women struggle significantly with, a pornography habit or addiction that they can't break.
It's really fascinating because I don't think it is something that is often acknowledged in a lot of Christian communities. It's one of these things. I think every Mother's Day you come around church and we all praise and honor the mothers, and every Father's Day we talk about how sorry men have been. And it's interesting. Now, statistically, the numbers may not be the same, but there's a common thread in the fact that this is not something that the enemy is solely attacking men on. The enemy is attacking or presenting a possibility of a downfall across the board, which is one of the things that really, really fascinated me when I was reading over this. That one of the process here, you had Pastor Tommy Nelson, who's a part of the Dallas Theological Seminary, that said this: we don't ask students anymore if they struggle with porn. We ask how bad their struggle is. That's a fascinating quote to me, because this is where I'm at on this, because if there's the acknowledgement of this is across the board, pornography is an issue across the board. Are we looking at this in the wrong spectrum of things, where, kind of like what he said, we don't ask if they struggle, we're acknowledging it and asking how bad the struggle is? Is that something where we have to, as leaders in the body of Christ and as Christians across the board, we can't ignore it anymore? We have to re-look at how we're viewing this addiction.
Yeah. And I think that, this is, really crucial, because it really highlights a major dysfunction with this topic within the body of Christ. So we acknowledge that, hey, these young pastors that are being trained struggle with porn, and yet they're moving into a church. Most of our churches have a punitive culture, which means if the pastor admits that he struggles with porn, man, he's afraid he might lose his job, because he may lose his job, and so the pastor's thinking in the back of his mind, it's like, dude, I've got a wife and 2 kids, and man, I went to seminary for this, and, man, I don't feel the freedom to share that I struggle. There was an interesting survey, and I talk about this in my book on the chapter Pastors and Porn. But the fact that 43% of parishioners say that if their pastor is struggling with porn, he should resign. And which is interesting. So it's like, 43% are saying, hey, if my pastor's struggling, they should resign. But it was interesting because John Piper, said that percentage is appallingly low, meaning, man, more Christians should think their pastor should resign if he struggles with porn. I have a ton of respect for John Piper, and yet I think that's the wrong approach, because if there's a punitive culture, our leaders are not going to feel the freedom to repent. We know from Galatians 6:1 where it says, brethren, those who are spiritual among you, if anyone struggles with a sin, is caught in any sin, let those who are spiritual restore them in a spirit of gentleness. And so the goal is restoration. And so when we don't have that, so if you think of the situation, it's like, hey, all of our seminarians are struggling, and yet they're going into a church that, thinks they should resign if they struggle. So what's that going to do? It's going to cause everybody to stay in the shadows. Our leadership does not feel the freedom to repent. And so guess what the church isn't doing on this topic? They're not repenting. That's one of the reasons that only 7% of pastors say their church has a program or resource to help their people in this area. And so, I have a good friend that, he lost his marriage in his church because of his struggle with porn as a pastor, former pastor. But he says, man, pornography is Satan's masterpiece, because, man, he's, capturing the hearts and minds of the next generation. Man, he's, capturing at a large amount, and yet the church isn't talking about it. And there's this punitive culture. And so many of the pastors who are struggling are just staying in the shadows instead of repenting and getting help. And so, yeah, it's a massive issue.
That's pretty intriguing to me, because I'm sitting here. I know that the realization that someone could be discovered with pornography, that it would bring on shame, but in the reality of, hey, I could lose my position in the church as a leader. I'm wondering if, even in the acknowledgement of that, I'm trying to think how to word this correctly, Ted, is in the sense of, it's not easy to say that it's all shame that keeps it hidden, because is it safe to say a lot of times what is being hidden is not necessarily all shame, whereas a lot of it is trying to protect the income, trying to protect the reputation. And it's not just a guilty thing. It is, I'm trying to guard myself from all destruction.
Yeah. And I think that's, and I think that's definitely part of it is, with a punitive culture, there can kind of be a spectrum of, man, how that impacts a person. For some people, it's, more the pride issue and, hey, my reputation. For others, it's more, hey, all I've got is a seminary degree. What else am I going to do if I lose my job? And so I think there's probably a spectrum, of that. And yet, we've interacted with, some different groups who've done a great job of helping churches and denominations really establish a restorative culture. And I share about this in the book, but it's basically adopting a statement that goes, that's basically says something to the effect of, if you haven't done something with another person or illegal, you can confess your struggle with pornography and get help. And so hey, the goal is restoration, and so it just kind of communicates that, hey, come out of the shadows and, man, let's get help. Because if our spiritual leaders are staying in the shadows, then that means the people in the pews are staying in the shadows. But I really think that, man, there could be, an incredible opportunity for revival if, man, the church, addresses this issue that is keeping so many of their spiritual leaders, in the shadows on this. Because, if they're stuck in the shadows, that's where the parishioners are going to be. And so I think it's an important topic.
Yeah, I'm just always fascinated that we don't have a safe place for leaders. I know this is something I run into in different aspects. People I have relationships with, and they'll share something with me, and point blank, they'll say, if I'd shared this with my congregation, I don't know if I'd have a position on Monday. Because they're hurting. You have a congregation that have leaders that they can pour themselves out to, but leaders seldom ever have someone that they can pour themselves out to. So that really just absolutely catches my attention in this. But I know too, when we're talking about this, we're talking about leaders, we're talking about men, we're talking about women. You have parents who will discover a child has been introduced to pornography. And I think a lot of times parents can, because of the nature, because of everything that is involved with pornography, the shame, the guilt, how do we act? How do we do this? There also comes that where parents beat themselves up a lot of times. How should parents respond when they discover a child has been introduced to pornography?
Yeah. And that's important to, not multiply the shame for the child, but, to allow the child to know, hey, if I discover, look at their browsing history and discover, the parent needs to be careful not to shame, but, to have a very serious conversation that begins to unpack the seriousness of the issue. And, and I think it's important for parents to view it not just, hey, this is a problem to address, but it's really an opportunity to seize, because it's an opportunity to, really kind of speak the biblical perspective about sex, that, hey, it's a gift that God's given. We have an enemy who's twisted it. He's the great counterfeiter. And so this is something that God's created for, for intimacy between a man and a wife in marriage. And, we have an enemy that, as John 10:10 says, has come to steal, kill, and destroy. So he wants to take what God has made good and he wants to twist it and pervert it. And hey, let's look at all the negative consequences of pornography. And, one of the growing, aspects, and we may get into this later, is, porn-induced erectile dysfunction, that men in their 20s and 30s and even teenagers as young as 15 are struggling with, because they've rewired their brain on porn since they were, 11, 12, 13. And so, man, a real sexual experience is a completely foreign, it's an alien experience. And so they lose the ability to respond. And so, yeah, but those are the kinds of examples that we could share with, our children in an appropriate way to help them see that, hey, the reason God has boundaries on sex is because it's a powerful thing. And when you get outside those boundaries, let's look at, hey, why are porn users less sexually satisfied than non-users? Hey, why are people who are married having more sex and more satisfying sex than, the singles who, aren't married but having sex? And, you can kind of go down the list. But I just think it's a golden opportunity to help students, children, begin to see how relevant the Bible is at speaking to such a modern issue. And so I think it's important, and de-shame the topic, with your kids. Let them know that, hey, this is something we want to talk about. And, ideally, parents are having these conversations when their kids are very young. And just, and even talking in terms of, hey, there are good pictures and bad pictures. God's given us private parts, and sometimes people take pictures of those private parts and put them on the, take pictures of it, and you may see them. Hey, if you ever see a picture like that, come talk to me. And so all of a sudden, just with that little bit, you've given them permission, you've opened the door, you've de-shamed it, and you put it out there, because I promise you, the world is going to fill in those blanks for our kids. And yet, parents, had to take the initiative. I was on a radio program, Ryan, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and we had callers, and a woman called in and shared the story of her 10-year-old daughter. She discovered her 10-year-old daughter is addicted to porn, and she's been watching hardcore videos for the last 12 months. Lots of hardcore videos. And, the mom's heart was just broken. And she was like, hey, I've got boys, but I never thought that I would have to worry about that with my girl. And it was just something that she was like, well, I thought when they got to be teenagers, maybe this is something we'd have to deal with. But, man, parents need to take the initiative in this area, because it's huge.
And it really is a different modern culture right now. I was thinking not long ago, even when I was growing up, I'm not as old as I think that I am, but I'm definitely not as young as I once was. But in my time growing up, you still had to go to the store and purchase, a magazine. But now everything is at the touch of our fingertips. There's so many different avenues, and I'm saying to all parents, we need to take every step that we can to protect our children. But we do live in a world where a lot of times children are able to figure out ways to discover porn. If they don't figure it out, they're introduced at school or a friend or even at church with people from church. And I, I I feel like because of that, even the little window that pornography is able to get into our children, parents still take on this great guilt and shame because, they feel like they have failed in some way because their child was introduced to it and they didn't even know it, and they done everything that they were supposed to do, but somehow, some way that happened. What do you tell parents that are doing everything that they're supposed to be doing, having the conversations, going down the list, but somehow the enemy still gets in? What do you say to those parents?
Yeah. And I would say, man, give yourself grace that, you've done everything you could. And, man, that's all that we're asked to do. I would say, Ryan, that, it's been my experience, unfortunately, that the parent you're talking about is very much the minority among Christian parents, that the vast majority, is they're just, it hasn't registered. It's like, well, my kid's only, 10 or 11, we're going to have
Wow.
we'll put stuff on when they're, get older. I talk to Christian, parents all the time. It's like, oh yeah, have you given your kid a smartphone? Oh yeah, we gave it to him when they was 7th grade. It's like, man, what are you doing to, what do you got on there from filters? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, what? It's just, and so, man, it's from my experience, the parent you're talking about is very much the minority, unfortunately. Wow. And so I would say to them, man, you're doing an incredible job. I would say to the rest, man, we've got to wake up. On a regular basis, I hear parents say, hey, my kid who's in college just told me that he's been addicted to porn since he was in 7th grade, when he got his iPhone. And the parents never knew. He never told. And it was this massive secret for, 6 years. And that is happening. Unfortunately, that is the majority of Christian homes. Again, from my experience, they have very little, minimal, restrictions on their kids' devices, and allow them to have it in their rooms, and just stuff like that. A porn addiction is birthed out of private access, and so if your kid has private access to the internet, man, that's where a porn addiction happens.
That's really, I guess a word is scary, but unnerving, that an overwhelming majority of quote unquote Christians are just ignoring the realities of the world that we live in. They're willfully deciding, hey, we're not going to take these steps. We're not going to protect. We're not going to do this because it is just what it is. And that's a little bit unnerving because I see that in a lot of areas for a lot of times, and it's frustrating, as a minister of the gospel as well. It's frustrating that we don't walk in a little bit more wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. But again, just hearing you say that, it's something that sticks real deep in me again. It's like, golly bum.
Well, and I would say that the majority of them aren't like, hey, I know it's out there, and I know, man, my kids are watching it, I'm just not going to mess with it. I think it's more, and this is where I think there's a gap of understanding and education. Man, do you know what your kids are watching? Do you know what the kids at school are talking about to your kids? And, I was talking to one of the guys that's in one of my groups, and he said, as a 5th grader, so this would have been, 10, 12 years ago, he was like, we used to make fun of the one kid who had never seen porn. And we're like, dude, you got to go watch this, go to this website and look at this. And he was just like, man, and this, again, this was 10, 12 years ago when he was a fifth grader. And so that's what kids are doing, putting the pressure. And it's like, hey, here's the website. You got to go see it, come back and tell us what you thought about it tomorrow. And so I think parents are, uninformed, like the mom who called. She was like, man, it wasn't even on my radar that I need to even be concerned about this with my daughter, or, their other kids. And so I think that's a big part of it. But to me, that's where the church needs to step in to educate their kids on this, or, educate the parents on this topic, equipping the saints, and I think if the church is going to ever adequately address this issue, we have to remove it from being just a recovery issue for the person who has problems and make it a discipleship or equipping issue for the whole church, because this is such a massive issue. We all need to be better equipped so we can help people find freedom. Because if our discipleship doesn't address this issue effectively, then we have a huge hole in our discipleship. Because man, just so much of addressing this issue just, man, speaks to the core of the person, as First Peter 2:11 says, beloved, as aliens and strangers, abstain from fleshly lust, which wage war against the soul. And man, as God describes how fleshly lust, like pornography, impacts a person, he uses warfare imagery. And, this is, man, a waging of war against the soul. And so, addressing this issue with biblical gospel-centered solutions, man, really needs to be, something the church is equipped in.
Yeah. And you really do. You kind of have to be on guard on all times. I have 4 children, and one of my children really loves comic books. And as a gift, we were looking for a specific comic book, and I was in the bookstore, and they had a thicker comic book than a typical comic book. And so I've, opened it up. I'm skimming through it, making sure everything's okay. And I come across a scene that 2 of the comic book characters were both female. They were undressing each other, kissing each other, and they had a vibrator in their hand as well. And I was like, no, this is crazy. This is, and I was, this is a comic book, but it really, we really have to be attentive, because I love what you're saying. It is not only a redemptive side, but it is something that has to be discipleship equipped and advanced in that. So what are some of the roots of an addiction to pornography?
Yeah, in the book, we look at 6 roots of addiction. And it's interesting, these are roots that really apply to any addiction. And it's interesting, when the Apostle Paul was addressing the Ephesian Christians and talking about their, sexual bondage, he also addresses these 6 roots, which is, really fascinating, because it's only been in the last 2 to 3 decades that we've identified these 6 roots. And yet, God and his word, addressed them 2,000 years ago. But, the first root of addiction is the most obvious. It's the sexualized society. I'll just run through these quick. And, if you want to dive into any of them, is the sexualized society. There's the fact that, man, sex is all around us, man, access is all around us. And so for each one of these roots, there's a corresponding area of growth or a solution that addresses it. And so a person must really grow in pursuing holiness in order to address, the sexualized society. And so, just understanding a person's triggers, and building boundaries, for those triggers is important. The addicted brain, which we've talked about, just that, when a person starts chasing that dopamine high, they begin to build these, very strong porn pathways in their brain. And so one of the things that, we do in our program is we teach people to build a new neurological pathway. And so, the way you address the addicted brain is by renewing the mind. It's not enough to just repress the old pathway, but you must build new ones. And so that's an important piece. Isolation is, another root of addiction. A sex addiction, a pornography addiction, they are categorized as an intimacy disorder. And so if a person has less vulnerable and authentic relationships in real life, they are more vulnerable to the fake intimacy of pornography. Because, one of the things that people, must recognize is, porn is fake intimacy, that it's a place that people learn to go where they can feel wanted, they can feel desired in the fantasy of sex, they can feel significant. It's, people start building this emotional connection with pornography. Therapists call it dating porn. Because porn has been there for you when you've been feeling down. It's been a place you could go to feel a whole lot better, and it becomes this fake intimacy. And so, building authentic relationships, is really the solution. For this, having authentic, accountability, and just being vulnerable and honest. Negative emotions, and I talked about this one, just when a person starts using porn to medicate their negative emotion, and that's when the addiction experts tell us that's when an addiction goes to a whole new level of depth. And so one of the things we teach in our program, which we have an app, and again, it's all free, but a person checks in with their accountability partner on a daily basis, and then they answer a couple questions about their emotion, answer a few other questions, and send that in. But just naming the emotion, helps, de-trigger it, and, helping people grow in their emotional intelligence, so they can begin to identify, hey, what are my emotional triggers? Hey, how can I build in, processing my emotions instead of medicating them, is really an important, process. And, as an example, King David in Psalm 139, 23 and 24, he says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there's any hurtful way in me." In that passage, King David is feeling anxiety, and he says, God, see if there's any hurtful way in me. I want you to, help me figure out why I'm anxious. He didn't really know why, but it's, a beautiful example of, learning to process your emotions, because what most of us do, we just medicate them. We stuff them, we don't think about them. But I think this is such an important part of learning to love God with all our heart, the emotional piece. And instead of, allowing our emotions to lead us, to porn, we can allow it to lead us to intimacy with Christ and with others as we learn to communicate our emotions. The fifth root of addiction is shame. And, one of, guilt and shame are different. Guilt says, I've done bad. Guilt's a godly, expression. Hey, when we, sin, we feel guilt. Hey, I've done bad. Mm-hmm. Shame is different. Shame says, I am bad. There's a self-loathing at the core of shame. There's a self-hatred. And when, one of the saddest things, Ryan, that I've seen is when a Christian is struggling with a pornography addiction, he's committed to God not to do it again. He's committed to himself not to do it again, his spouse, and yet he keeps going back to it. The shame just multiplies. And there's so many Christians that are walking around with a shame identity instead of living out of their identity in Christ. And so that's one of the things that we really focus on in our program is, helping people live out of an identity in Christ. And what does that look like on a regular basis? And because when a person gets their worth from Christ, it frees us up to be more vulnerable and honest and open, and instead of just staying in the shadows and trying to manage our image. And then the last The last root of addiction is trauma. And, whether that's, abuse, could be a dysfunctional background, but, could be, trauma with a little t that, it's not necessarily a big event, but, trauma experts tell us that the most traumatic aspect of trauma isn't the event itself, but it's the lies we believe as a result of that event. Lies like, hey, that was my fault. I deserve this. God is done with me. Hey, I'm never going to be able to overcome this. I'm always going to be a failure. And so, really understanding how to identify the lies that we often repeat to ourselves, that the enemy whispers to us, that, then replace those with the truth of God's word, is really, an important aspect. Because if somebody doesn't deal with that, trauma, that trauma is often what's feeding that shame, which is what's feeding those negative emotions, which is what's causing that person to, continue to run to porn, to medicate. And so, getting below the surface and, and dealing with, some of those root causes, man, it's been powerful, because people don't go through our program. They don't just find freedom, but it's like, and one of the things we say is, you don't just quit porn, but you must outgrow porn. You got to grow in personal holiness. You have to grow in renewing your mind with God's word. You have to grow in authentic relationships. You have to grow in, learning to process your emotions. You have to grow in your identity in Christ. You have to grow in replacing lies with truth. And, when Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. What we have seen is, before God's truth sets us free, it changes us. And because it changes us, the freedom lasts. And so that's, that gives you a quick overview of the 6 roots, and really our program, online program, kind of walks through each of those 6 systematically, and, helps people, apply principles to each one.
That's really interesting about the response to trauma. That I never would have thought that. So I'm captivated by that. But I do. It's interesting because as we're filming this and recording this, you talked about the sexual activation that's in our culture right now. We're trying to cancel a plastic potato because we identified as Mr. Potato Head, and
Yeah.
at the same time, we're promoting Cardi B and her song WAP, W-A-P, acronym for something I'm not going to repeat, and her performance at the Grammys. And it's just a very, very sexually explicit. And it's just interesting where we're at as a culture, what we're permitting versus what we're counseling. Even just this past week, Pepe Le Pew from the Looney Tunes has been, deemed cancel worthy and stuff. But again, I look at Cardi B and all this, and I'm going, wow, it's just really fascinating. But in thinking about that, I had that on my mind today because I was watching someone else address it. And this thought came back to my mind. I would love for you to touch on this. In the last election, social media was able to lock up certain personal tweets, personal websites, everything. And it showed that if they wanted certain content off of the internet, they could pull it off. And yet, pornography is one of the most easy accessible, but not just pornography, child pornography is easy accessible. Why in the world are we in the culture that we are? Why does pornography, and especially child pornography, why does it keep out? Why is it able to stay out there? Is it simply because the destruction of man, or is it just a hand over fist money making machine?
Yeah. And I think there's, probably multiple reasons behind it. The porn industry is $100 billion industry, which is about 3 times the size of the tobacco industry. And so if you remember in the early 50s, the tobacco industry suppressed the dangers of smoking for about 3 decades. And, because they changed public perception, they had their own scientist, so to speak, that said, man, hey, the link between smoking and lung cancer really isn't there. Hey, we need more, research. The porn industry has done the exact same thing when it comes to porn, that they, they try to make it a free speech issue, that, that's what, unfortunately the Supreme Court, upheld it as a free speech issue. And so they use that. And then the porn industry, is putting out their own research that, hey, this, porn's normal, they're teaching, and I mentioned this in my book, there's an online sex education program that is trying to teach, 5 million kids that, with all the online, sex education, but they're trying to teach kids that porn is normal, even a few times a day. I mean, and this is for pre-pubic children. We're talking 8 to 10, 8 to 12, it's crazy. And so, but you're right. It's like, man, the God of this world, Satan is, having a field day, and unfortunately the church has lost its voice on this topic. We, our leaders really aren't talking about it. And yet the enemy, in an unprecedented fashion, is reaching into Christian homes, non-Christian homes alike, and capturing the hearts and minds of the next generation. Because porn changes people. It changes their perspective. It changes how they view themselves, how they view others, how they view, God. It's like, we have the data. Porn changes people, and it's always for the worst. And so, yeah, it's crazy to think about, what is permitted and what is canceled. And, unfortunately, so many of our leaders, are in the shadows on this one. And yet again, I see it just because, of what we're seeing in the freedom. The freedom is the first step, because Hebrews 12:1 says, lay aside the weight and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. That, man, God has a race for us to run, man, to know Christ, to be like Christ, to make Christ known. And yet, man, porn is the biggest weight that is holding people back, and sin that is entangling people. And man, when we help people remove that, they're able to run free and pursue the purposes that God has for us. And so that's my prayer, is that, man, more and more people in the church will really seize the opportunity, on this issue.
So you have the free online class. I want you to speak of that, but also tell us how to get a copy of this book.
Okay. Yeah. So thefreedomfight.org, thefreedomfight.org is where you can go for our online pornography addiction recovery program. It's a 6-month program that you can go through in a group. We encourage people to go through it with their small group. We have a leader's guide, all the discussion questions. Like I said, it's a, app and a website. And we also have a 30-day challenge, which for a lot of people, that's kind of a good first step. But for 30 days, it's an email-based program. You get, 10 minutes or less of content that will show up in your inbox, a video, a passage of scripture, a short article that you can begin walking through with, hey, somebody you're mentoring, a teenage, child of yours, a men's group, a women's group. And so it's a great kind of first step. And then you can find our book on our website as well. It's also on Amazon. It's just, in all the formats, Audible, Kindle, and paperback.
Awesome. So I want to give you an opportunity to have the final word. You can share any information you want to share, anything you want to relate to the listeners and viewers, something that maybe I didn't ask that is near and dear to your heart, and you want to share that, I want to give you this opportunity to have the final word.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I would just say, man, to your listeners that, struggle, maybe they've tried to find freedom, that I just want them to know freedom is possible. And again, one of the reasons that, we made our online program free is, you can start the program and, at some point you're going to have to bring somebody in on that. And we actually coach you up on how to, bring an accountability partner in on that. And so, but you can start that process free. We just ask for a first name and an email. So you can be as anonymous as you want, and start that process. But freedom is possible. And so I just want to, encourage you to take that first step, whether that's confessing to a friend or a mentor, whether that's, hey, starting the online program or the 30-day challenge. But just know that freedom is possible, but you need to make that first step to come out of the shadows and get help.
Love it. And Ted, thank you so much for being a part of this, sharing your knowledge, the information that you have, but most importantly, your heart for this, to see not only men develop and grow, be equipped and discipled, but women, teenagers, young people, everyone across the board, to be the sons of God that we are destined and purposed to be. Thank you so, so much.
Absolutely. Ryan, thanks for having me.
For everyone else, I genuinely pray and hope that this episode has challenged you, it has equipped you, and it has encouraged you to continue to advance the kingdom of God. Until the next episode, guys, be blessed in the name of Jesus.
Thank you for listening to the Blacksmith Chronicles podcast. It is our prayer that this episode challenged you, encouraged you, and equipped you for the advancement of the kingdom of God. For more episodes or ways that you can partner with Ryan Johnson Ministries, please go to www.ryanjohnson.us or email us directly at info@ryanjohnson.us. Please join us again soon for another episode of the Blacksmith Chronicles.